You're listening to The Secret to My Success, an interview-style podcast that asks our guests what trait, skill, or characteristic they possess that's made them a success. Hosted by Shelby Skurhawk.
So for the longest time within my personal career, I let bosses make or break my career trajectory just by taking their word for everything. And then I would internalize their opinions so much that it affected my self-confidence. Even then, to the point where I didn't feel confident or qualified unless upper management bestowed some kind of title upon me that gave me authority. So, this is the stuff of organizational psychology and what my guest today has covered in her new book, Zen Your Work: Create Your Ideal Work Experience Through Mindful Self Mastery by Karlyn Borysenko. Karlyn, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
So, I want to start with your anecdote opening the book of Zen Your Work. And let's talk about some of those negative work experiences because I want to kind of conjure these or invoke those feelings for our listeners, examples of the types of just lousy jobs, lousy bosses, and lousy people that we all tend to come in contact with.
Yeah, absolutely. I've had many of those over the course of my career. And I told the anecdote because I wanted people to get a sense that, creating a great work experience, sometimes it happens because you hit that rock bottom. And for me, I hit absolute rock bottom in the last toxic organization that I worked with before I opened my own practice, in that, I had a horrible boss. She was an absolute narcissist. The CEO that she reported to was actually much worse than she was in terms of like the narcissist scale. And I really think it trickled down throughout the organization. And it was one of those situations where I went into work every single day at this company that I revered before I took the job there. I loved this company from the outside. I was actually so excited to get the opportunity to work there. But I went in every day and I knew that like nothing I did was going to be good enough. I was going to be thrown under the bus by my coworkers. I was going to hear about it from my boss at some point. My confidence was absolutely in the toilet. I would go home every day on my drive home. I would either cry or I would just scream and shout and be really angry. And so that's when I started doing a lot of this Zen stuff that I talk about in the book. It wasn't in a great work environment. It was in an environment where I absolutely had to do it in order to reduce my
Right.
own stress level.
So this book obviously was born from experience, not just theory. So when you were in that situation, that's just a leap in itself to realize that you're in that situation and be mindful of it and be able to change the behavior. At that time, were you already a psychologist?
Well, I was actually it was funny, I was actually finishing up my dissertation at the time, but they don't teach you practical stuff when you're doing a PhD. They teach you how to do research, and you read a lot of research and a lot of academic stuff, and it's all fine, well, and good, and, there's a lot of that stuff in the book, but they don't teach you how to go into work and create a better experience for yourself. So, it was actually I think that actually made it worse for me because my dissertation that I was working on was actually about workplace bullying and young professionals being a target of it. And I just would look up some days and I'm like, I'm living my dissertation
Right.
right now. This is fantastic. Thank you, universe, for this glorious gift.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and that's an interesting thesis topic. Was that specifically like the Mean Girls type of bullying, or did that kind of run the gamut?
It ran the gamut. I interviewed young professionals in a variety of different fields and organizations and types of industries. And a lot of times it would be the boss that was doing the bullying. Sometimes it would actually be a subordinate. Sometimes it would be a peer that was doing it. It wasn't just necessarily mean girl stuff. It ran the gamut from just really nasty comments all the time to I actually had one person in the study who would actually get death threats that the HR department at their organization knew they were getting death threats and did nothing about it.
Very bad experiences and
Yeah.
things that really affect your entire well-being. That's something that I think a lot of people, when you go into the workforce, you just kind of expect that this is your dream job, this is your dream company, this is all going to work out great. But kind of when you meet that real world and you come across difficult bosses or coworkers that do throw you under the bus for no seemingly good reason, you start to get really disillusioned with kind of work life in general. So my question is that how do you, I guess, start? I mean, a lot of times when you're in that toxic situation, you are a victim, but you're acting like a victim or thinking you're a victim. And you are kind of just stuck in that, woe is me. I don't know what to do. I can't change it. I can't affect it. So, what are my choices? I don't have any. How do you take that very first step out of that place of desperation and start to convince yourself that you can change things?
I think it actually starts with realizing that you are only a victim of the situation if you allow yourself to be a victim of it. So I actually I hate the word victim when it comes to stuff like workplace bullying and even, sexual harassment and the Me Too movement stuff that's going on right now. I hate the word victim. I always use the word target,
Hmm.
because just because someone is targeting you, and it could be for horribly toxic reasons, but that doesn't mean you have to be a victim of that circumstance. And the differentiation for me is that when you are spending the bulk of your energy focusing on what other people are doing to you to detract from your experience, that's being a victim. However, you have the power at any time to flip the script and say, instead of focusing on what other people are doing to me, because I can't change them, I can't impact what they're going to do to me day to day. That's their choice. So instead of doing that, I'm going to focus on what I can do to get out of this situation, to make these negative things stop. That's being empowered.
Yeah.
So being a victim is focusing on what other people are doing to you. Being empowered is focusing on what you can do to create a better situation for yourself. And that's the switch that needs to happen. I think a lot of people at work, they spend so much energy trying to control other people and change the way they're speaking or acting or the things that they're doing. And it's almost a fool's errand, because if those people don't come to the realization that changing is in their best interest, they're not going to do it. So instead, stop focusing on that. Focus on what you can do.
When you say that you are in a toxic environment, um, I wonder if there's a little bit of a chicken and an egg. What I mean by that is that, so if you're in a situation where you are focusing on what other people are doing and more, I guess, consumed with what that person isn't doing or what this person is doing wrong, or like over analyzing what my boss says, which, oh, that must have been a slam against me. If you have that mindset of looking at things as things reactionary, things happening to you, I guess my I'm having a hard time quantifying it, but if then you leave that toxic environment and you go to the next company, do those same problems still kind of follow you though?
I think that you've quantified it quite well. Actually, yeah, that's exactly what I see with my clients. Is if they're having a negative experience in one working environment and they're focusing all their attention on all these bad things that are happening to them and why it's causing their negative experience, they can get themselves out of that company. But what I tend to see happen is exactly what you just described. They go to the new company and they experience the exact same thing again.
Right.
And then they might even go to another one after that and they experience the same thing again. And what's happening is that they have not dealt proactively with how they're contributing to the problem. Because we are absolutely fantastic at creating self fulfilling prophecies for ourselves. If you wake up in the morning and you're having a bad day and you say, you know what, today is going to suck at work. It's going to be awful. All my meetings are going to be horrible. My coworker is going to throw me under the bus. Guess what's going to happen? You're going to go into work and you're going to look for reasons to be upset. You're going to look for reasons to say these meetings were big waste of time. You're going to look for reasons to say your coworker threw you under the bus, when in fact they may not have done anything with that intent at all. Right? But when we are determined to be upset, we will find reasons to reinforce being upset. And it's not looking at what's happening to you objectively. It's looking for reasons to reinforce, I want to be angry. I want to be stressed out. I want to be frustrated. After a while of being in a toxic working environment, this is going to sound really weird. That actually becomes people's comfort zone that they don't want to leave.
So that perpetual state of stress, I know that studies have kind of shown that some people are just in that state and it's not necessarily a stressful environment. It's a stressful mindset of loving the noise and thriving on the adrenaline that creates. But not all stress is created equal. And so if it's that type of toxic bad stress, then yeah, you are basically creating that stress all around you no matter where you go.
Well, I mean, just think about it from a very practical level. I actually think that most people are addicted to stress on some level. And just let's think about why that is for a second. So, anytime something happens in our brain, we feel an emotion in our brain, the brain releases all sorts of beautiful chemicals and hormones and all these things into our body, right? And when that happens, we actually start to physically feel the emotion that we're experiencing in our brain. And we've all experienced this. Think about a time when you've had a nightmare and you've woken up and your whole body's shaking or your heart is beating really fast or you're sweating, and maybe you had a nightmare where you were being chased through the woods by a monster and you wake up thinking and feeling physically like you just ran a 5K.
Right.
That's all happening in your head. Now, the same thing happens when we experience stress at work. We get all those chemicals and hormones, and it gives us that physical feeling of our body tenses up. We may grind our teeth, maybe you get a headache, stomach ache, things like that. Same thing. Now, what happens when you're used to having that infusion of chemicals from your brain because you're stressed out all the time, but maybe your boss goes on vacation. Maybe it's your boss that's causing the problems and they go on vacation and all of a sudden things aren't stressful for a couple days. What happens? Your body goes through physical withdrawal. And we don't realize that this is happening,
Yeah.
right? So your body's screaming. It's like, where are my chemicals, brain? What's going on? We had a good thing going here.
Right.
And then all of a sudden, you start looking for problems without even being aware that you're looking for problems. And that's how we create it.
And that's that outlook of you start the day looking for something wrong, you're gonna find something wrong.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think anyone who's listening to this, if they're really honest with themselves, they can identify a time where they were determined to be pissed off and nothing was going to make them feel any better. They were looking for reasons to be pissed off. Yeah, I mean, we absolutely are able of creating those self-fulfilling prophecies for ourselves when we want to, either consciously or subconsciously.
Speaking of consciously or subconsciously, then, we know that our mind plays many, many tricks on us. And so you go over three particular ways that your mind plays tricks: projection, confirmation bias, and fundamental attribution error. Let's go over those. So, projection, tell me about what that mind trick is.
But just to preface this a little bit, I want to just emphasize to people, so our brain all the time is taking in a lot more information than we're consciously aware of. So the brain is taking in 11 million pieces of information every single second across our five senses. Of those 11 million pieces of information, we are consciously aware of 40 of them.
Hmm.
There is a huge disconnect between what is going on in front of us and what we are actually consciously aware of. So we do a lot of things without realizing on a conscious level that's what we're doing. Projection, fundamental attribution error, and confirmation bias just tend to be some of the three most common that I see, but there are lots and lots of others. So, projection, think about it like this. So, anytime you see something in someone else that upsets you or pisses you off, something like that, it makes you feel bad. A lot of times, what you're really doing is you're seeing something that you perceive to be true about yourself on a subconscious level. You're not aware of it, and you're seeing it in that person that you're looking at because that makes it easier to deal with. A really common thing that I see pop up a lot of times is my coworker doesn't like me or my boss doesn't like me. Well, what you're really saying is you don't like them. There's a reason that you don't like them that you just haven't faced yet. And so what you're doing is you're saying they don't like me as a way to make it easier for you not to like them. They may not feel one way or the other about you. Just being aware that anything you see in someone else is probably something that's going on with you. That's essentially what projection is.
So those examples would be somebody that just grates your skin that you feel is too abrupt, too aggressive. Is that then the fact that you think you're too aggressive, or that you wish you were more aggressive, and so you see that in that person and resent it?
Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly right. It could be either of those. A lot of times, you see people, the biggest butting of heads that I see in the work environment, it doesn't come from people with different communication styles. It comes from people with the same communication style. And so they're angry at the other person because they're doing the exact same thing they are, and then they butt heads.
All right, so let's talk about confirmation bias.
Ah, confirmation bias is essentially when you only take in or look for information that reinforces the decision that you've already decided to make. And so we see this one a lot in terms of, think about a time when you've been at work and you have an idea for a project or a new strategy and you've done your due diligence. You've gotten all this data and all these examples of other places doing and things like that, and you're ready to present it to the boss, and you lay out this exceptionally logical way to do something. And for you, this is like a home run. You're like, how could anyone disagree with this? And then your boss says, no, I've already decided to do it this other way over here. So, what happens in a lot of those situations is the boss was persuaded by someone maybe they had a better relationship with, or maybe they had a company that they consider a rival, and they were looking at what they were doing and they want to copy that, something like that. But essentially what happened was they had already made the decision before they even walked into that meeting, and it didn't matter how much data or logical reasons you presented. They'd already made up their minds, so they weren't going to take it in. See the opposite thing happen as well. Like maybe a coworker has an idea that they want to do something, and they're not going to go to the person that they know is going to be opposed to the idea and say, what could go wrong about this with this idea? What are some things I need to think about? That'd be a really smart move, in order to head off any obstacles. That's not what's going to happen. They're going to go to the person that they know is going to say, oh my God, that's a great idea. You are the smartest person ever. That's the person they're going to go to. So with confirmation bias, it's really important to just be aware that most of the time our inclination is to seek out that information that reinforces what we've already decided to do in our head or a perspective we already have. And if you want to combat it, just make the proactive step to go and ask people that you know are going to disagree with you.
Again, in a work environment example, so you believe that your boss is picking on you, and so you can name all of those things that your boss has done to that's clear evidence that they are picking on you and they don't like you and they're out to push you out of the company. But then the confirmation bias is that maybe there's other things that are either neutral or actually positive experiences with the boss that completely disproves that, but you tend to ignore those things.
Absolutely. That is a great example. We look to confirm what we already believe is true.
And so then the third kind of most common mind trick, Jedi mind trick, if you will, is fundamental attribution error. What's that?
Yeah, so fundamental attribution error is essentially like when you make a mistake, you are inclined to blame the context that you're operating in for that mistake. So, say I initiated a new strategy for a company and it just really did not work. I might say things like, "Well, I didn't have support from Johnny Jones in marketing, and I didn't have the budget I needed, and the market conditions were not right for this strategy." I would look for external reasons to describe why my effort failed. That's for me. However, if I'm looking at a coworker, and especially one that I already don't like that much for some reason, and they have a screw up, what I might be more inclined to do is say, they are a horrible person. They don't know how to do their job. I don't know why they were ever hired in this. So when other people make a mistake, we're more inclined to blame internal personal qualities rather than looking like, they may not have had the budget. They may not have had the support. It may not have been a well thought through thing that they were given by their boss to do. That's essentially what it is. And looking at I recommend people do, and this is particularly true in toxic working environments where it's going to benefit you to give other people the benefit of the doubt because they're working in the same toxicity that you are, quite frankly. Most people are just coming in every day trying to do the very best they can. And giving people the benefit of the doubt that a lot of times when projects fail or things don't go as planned, there are usually external factors that are impacting that, and really trying to almost reserve judgment sometimes in those cases. I talk a lot about being non-judgmental in the book, reserving judgment and saying, you know what, maybe this is an opportunity to learn and iterate and do it better.
Right. And I think some of us probably have that self-awareness to know that when somebody you don't like messes up, you are going to be harder on them than you would somebody else. Something that you wrote about in the book that I found fascinating because I hadn't heard it before was the three brains, basically the old brain, kind of the mid brain, and the new brain. Tell me about those.
Yeah, so first, I do want to do a preface. If there are neuroscientists listening to this, I'm about to drive them absolutely insane because because the three brains, it is an oversimplification of how the brain works, but it's an analogy. It helps people understand what's going on. So essentially, you have three parts of the brain that we're going to think about for our purposes: the old brain, midbrain, and new brain. The old brain was the very first part of the brain to develop way, way, way back when we were cavemen, and it is interested in three things. It's interested in food, survival, and sex. And it is constantly scanning our environment on a subconscious level, looking for those three things. And when it finds it, it perks you up like a dog that has just seen a bone.
Hmm.
It says, pay attention to this. This is important. And that 11 million pieces of information that I referenced earlier, that's what's being taken into our brain when our old brain is scanning our environment, looking for food, survival, or sex, essentially. Um, so the old brain tries really hard to make all of our decisions for us based on that 11 million pieces of information. But when the decisions do not relate directly to those three things, then it has to consult a friend, and it consults the midbrain. Now, the midbrain is where we process all of our emotions. This is whether we're feeling happy or sad or stressed out or excited or frustrated or empowered or any of those things. Just like the old brain, the midbrain is also operating on a subconscious level. So we're not always consciously aware of what's going on inside of us emotionally. An example I always like to use is, think about a time when you have been in just the most knockdown, heated, drag out fight with your partner or your spouse, and you're just interested, you just want to keep fighting at this point, and midway through the conversation, you actually forget why you were originally angry. Happens all the time, right? So that's your midbrain. Now, another example of the midbrain is it also picks up on all nonverbal cues. So anytime you walk into a room and you just know something's wrong before anyone has said anything, that's your midbrain, right? It's taking in all this subconscious information, all these nonverbal cues, and it's processing all of it. It's delivering you an answer. It's just not telling you how it got there. So we have our survival in our old brain, our emotions in our midbrain, and then we get to the new brain. And the new brain, a lot of times, is what gets us into trouble at work because this is where we process all logic and reason. And it's also the only part of the brain that we are consciously aware of. And that's why we think a lot of times, especially at work, we want human beings to be logical and rational and data driven and all those things. But in terms of decision making hierarchy, you've got to think about the three parts of the brain like this: the new brain, where we process all that logic and reason, that's like the director. The midbrain is like the vice president, and the old brain is like the CEO. So, in terms of hierarchy, the new brain actually is the weakest decision making part of the brain. And what that leads to, and this is true in almost any situation I have found at work, this is like the answer to well, it's not the answer, it's a tool you can use to solve the problem, is this: human beings make decisions emotionally and then they justify them rationally. And if you understand that key component, that every single person you work with is probably making their decisions on a very deep subconscious emotional level before they hit to the logic and reason part, they're making those decisions emotionally and then looking for reasons to justify them rationally. That will help you navigate so many situations at work in a different way.
So a lot of our decisions do come from emotion, what we're feeling. If we feel insecure, or if we feel attacked, or we feel like people are kind of ganging up on us, we have those feelings, but then it goes through the filter of logic that I guess from that point then you start saying, well, he must not value a woman's opinion, or they must be picking on me because of this. And so trying to justify that, right?
I think that's a very good way to look at it. You're trying to use logic to explain something that you're experiencing on an emotional level. And I mean, let's look at the situation of like you got a male CEO maybe, and you think that because you're a woman, he's not valuing your opinion. Well, it could be that maybe this happened because you were in a meeting with a group of men that report to him, and you and maybe a couple other women, and he listened to the guy to your right before he listened to you. Well, maybe he has a longer relationship with that person.
Hmm.
Maybe he's just worked with him for 20, 30 years. It has nothing to do with him being a man and you being a woman. It just has to do with the relationship that they've developed. But jumping to that conclusion that he's never going to value me because I'm a woman, does that set you up for opportunities to be successful in that company if that's the mindset you're going into work with every single day?
Right.
No.
Because you think you're being targeted.
Yeah, you think you're being targeted. You might even create situations where nothing was going on at all and all of a sudden you become the target because you're acting as though you already are.
So that kind of acting on a defensive level, that certainly does root from emotion. So when dealing with emotions, I mean, what I shared in the opening, talking about, how a boss's opinion or anything that they say, basically, I kind of took that as gospel. And so then I would internalize that opinion to the point where I didn't have confidence in myself and my abilities if my boss didn't have confidence in me. And so trying to separate the, I guess, the emotion of a working environment from all of the other parts of the brain that are at work. How do we, I guess, realize when you're operating from a place of emotion and you can almost feel it like leaking out, like you're about to say something emotionally, and you're going to be mad. I mean, I've done this where I've been in meetings and I've said something snarky and I'm like, you know what? I'm going to beat myself up about that later because I know I shouldn't have said that. And I just let the frustration and all of those different factors about this person or that person kind of bubble up to the surface. What are, I guess, the strategies for dealing with that, in the context of those different parts of the brain?
So the first thing I want to emphasize is that we need to return to non-judgment. Right? The problem is not necessarily that you said something snarky in the meeting. The problem is that you walk out of that meeting and you beat yourself up for it
Yeah.
for hours after the meeting and you make yourself feel bad because you made a snarky comment. People make snarky comments. We're human beings. Well, the fun ones do anyway. We're not robots, right?
Right.
And maybe your coworkers didn't even notice it, but you're spending time beating yourself up. You've got to be your own best advocate, your own best friend, the very first person to have your back.
Yeah.
Right? What I tell people a lot of time is that, the world is a perfect place. It's not perfect in that you get everything you want the very second you want it, but it is perfect in that you will get exactly what you should expect to get based on what you contribute to the situation. And that's why you'll see a big focus of the book is not necessarily on how to deal with the coworker part of it or the boss part of it. It's how to deal internally with these ways that we sabotage ourselves.
Right.
There are exercises to help you become more aware of what's going on in your head, to become more confident, to become stronger, to stop judging yourself as being bad or incompetent when things go wrong, when you were probably just doing the best you could. Because if you aren't doing those things for yourself first, then why would anyone else do them for you?
That's, as listeners will of my show will probably know, I mean, that's something that I come back to often is this internal dialogue and the stories that you tell yourself. And I write about this often because I think a lot of people don't realize how toxic those stories can be. That you wouldn't say the things that you say to yourself to your very worst enemy, but you just let those go unchecked in your mind because your mind doesn't have a fact check. So if you say, I'm not good at my job, they don't want me, I'm not responsible, I can't show up on time, all of those things your mind is just believing it, right?
I'll be honest. I see a lot of people that are very happy in situations at work where they are put upon and they are the victims, and that's exactly where they want to be because of the stories that they've told themselves. I'm not good enough, things like that. Now that may not have anything to do with how their bosses actually perceive them. I can't tell you how many people I coach in companies where I'm brought in to work with them because the CEO really believes in them, sees them as an up and comer in the company, thinks they're an absolute rock star, but just wants to help them out on their career path. And then I talk to the person they're having me coach, and they're like, I'm going to get fired any day now. They're actively in fear of losing their job at any moment. That's not because of what the company's done to them or their boss has done to them. Their boss is trying to support them. It's because of the stories they've told themselves. So it's just about developing the capacity to tell yourself better stories and to become more comfortable receiving that love from yourself. So that's really what it comes down to at the end of the day. If we're not telling ourselves great stories about what we can do and what we're capable of, it's because on some level we learned that we're not supposed to receive that love. And everyone out there, that you don't have to do anything to
Right.
earn love. Like, that's our birthright. You should just be able to receive it, but we've learned not to as we've gotten older. That's the problem we need to fix.
So then how do you tell yourself better stories about a work environment that you believe you are being targeted and you feel like you're being pushed out? How do you, I guess, use those stories in your head to make better stories to, I guess, to push you to action?
Yeah, great question. So the first thing you have to do, if you have decided that this is a bad work environment and they're doing everything they can to push me out, well, that may or may not be true, but let's just start from that premise. The very best thing you can do to start to get out of this situation, because you want to get out of it on your terms, is say, you know what? That's okay. If they don't value me, that's fine. I'll go find another job somewhere else where I can be valued. And here are all the reasons why a company would want to hire me. Here are all the things that I'm really good at that I can do better than most of the people that I know. And then you put together the resume and then you start sending it out. I coach a lot of people who are beginning their job search, and I can't tell you sometimes how hard it is for me to even get people to send out a resume because they've told themselves that no one's going to hire me, I'm not good enough. Start there. Start by just looking at yourself and saying, you know what, I'm amazing, and here are all the reasons why I'm amazing. That's how you start telling yourself better stories, and it's going to feel weird. Understand, it's absolutely going to feel very uncomfortable for you to do this because you've probably gone through decades of your life where you haven't done it. It is a new exercise. And if it doesn't feel uncomfortable, you're not doing it right.
And that can be said for a lot of things. I mean, being outside of your comfort zone, that's the whole premise is that you don't build a muscle unless you push it to the limit to the point where you're sore. You don't grow from any experience by not experiencing new things and scary things. So, I guess that same principle then. The converse of that situation. So, same thing. You think your boss doesn't like you. You think he's trying to push you out, but you're in that situation where kind of like you said before, like you love that company. You feel like I shouldn't have to leave. My boss is the one that's the problem. How do you deal with that?
Well, I would say, do I really love the company? Or is this a situation where I feel really safe? This is my comfort zone. I've come into this company every day for years, and I would start there. Just have a really honest conversation with yourself about what you love about this job. Really. You might come up with a list where there's like 90% of the things that are going on in the company you're really happy about. It's just the boss issue that is causing problems. So then one of two things needs to happen. You either need to find a way to change your relationship with your boss, or you can try to find a way to transfer to a different boss within the company. In this case, I want to look at the way of changing your relationship with your boss, though, because this is the one that gets a lot of people. So what people try to do when they're doing this is they try to change the other person, right? They try to explain to them, this is how I perceive things and I want you to act differently or things like that. Those conversations never go well. Instead, what you have to do is take responsibility for how you're approaching them. Take responsibility for the stories that you're telling yourself about that person. This is a trick that I learned from actually my coach, and I write about it in the book. And what was happening was, and this isn't about his boss, but it's relevant. Every single day he was going. He's like a creature of habit, and every single day he was going into Starbucks, and he gets the same drink order. And he showed up, and there's this barista that was just giving him the evil eye every single day. And this totally threw off his morning because he places a very high premium on his happiness, and he didn't like going into the Starbucks to get his coffee and have someone giving him the evil eye. And so this was bothering him for a little while. And then he sat back and he kind of thought about it. And he said, you know what? It's not about what I think of myself, because I think I'm pretty great. It's not about what she thinks of me, because I don't actually know what she thinks of me. It's about what I think she thinks of me. And so if I'm going into this Starbucks and I think that, she must hate me, that's going to start my day off on the wrong foot. So how can you change the story? So what he did was he said, you know what? It's not that she hates me. It's that she totally wants me. She has this ridiculous crush on me. And so then
Right.
what happened? So now he's walking into the Starbucks, he's strutting a little bit. And of course, she's probably thinking, who is this guy and what is he doing? But guess what happened after a couple
Right.
weeks of just him pretending that she had a crush on him? She started being nicer to him, right? And it was partially because he allowed that more positive
Yeah.
relationship to develop. Now, that's a simple story of someone getting coffee every morning, but we can do the exact same thing. If you go into work and you just set the stage of, you know what? My boss that I want to change the relationship with, they support me. They want me to be successful because they know that when I'm successful, they're successful. And then just start acting as though that's true. You're not asking them to change at this point, but you're changing how you approach them. If you're truly committed to that and you're acting as though that's true, over time, that's going to change the way they perceive you. And that's going to change the relationship because you're allowing it to happen. Whereas before, if you're like, my boss hates me and they're out to make me miserable, well, you're clouding every single interaction with your boss in that perspective. Right? So this is about taking responsibility for what you're contributing. Now, does it work in 100% of cases? No, it doesn't. Absolutely not. But it works in a lot of them. And it's just about how committed are you to giving it a try. And then if it doesn't work, if you legitimately put everything you have into it and it just doesn't work, well, you know what? You got some practice. Go and get another job and go find a boss that is going to support you that it will work with.
Before I let you go, though, I've got a couple of quick hit questions for you. You ready?
Ready.
Best piece of advice you've ever gotten?
I got it from my mentor probably 15 years ago, and she told me, Karlyn, it's not about being right, it's about being effective.
What's the worst piece of advice you've ever gotten?
That I need to follow a career path that someone else sets for me in order to be successful.
Yeah. Which I think a lot of people would feel that pressure from parents and others.
Oh, yeah.
What movie can you quote by heart?
RoboCop.
Nice.
Dead or alive, you're coming with me. I'll buy that for $1.
And then finally, based on all of the things that you've talked about today and your own experiences of how you've used these techniques to turn your situation around and create your own situation, your own company, what then do you think is the secret to your success?
The secret to my success is telling myself the right stories. In any situation, telling myself the stories that support my success.
Karlyn, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. It was fun.